The Cannabis Conversation. A European perspective on the emerging legal cannabis industry.
Welcome to the Cannabis Conversation with Anush Desai, where we explore the new legal cannabis industry by speaking to the professionals helping to shape it. On today's show, I've got Paul Steckler. Paul is Managing Director for Canopy Growth International, which obviously is the biggest cannabis company in the world. Paul, welcome. How are you doing today?
I'm very good. Thanks for having me, Anuj. Good to be here.
No, real pleasure. Real pleasure. Had your colleague Hilary Black on previously, so good to get another Canopy executive on board. Where in the world are you today?
I'm in London today. I'm in our office in Paddington.
Very nice. Very nice. Cool. Well, we're going to talk about loads of stuff. You've got great background, which I think is really useful for the medical space. And we'll get into that in a second. We usually start with a bit about your personal story, actually. So, why and how did you get into the cannabis space?
Yeah, okay. So I'll probably go back even further, actually. I'll go to the start of my kind of career. So a very long time ago, I don't want to say how many years, but a very long time ago, I graduated. My degree was in microbiology and virology, which, as much as I loved it, I didn't want to be a microbiologist or a virologist. I ended up sending advertising for about a year after I graduated, as it was the kind of an easy job to get, and I needed some cash. So that was my first job, and realised very quickly that two things were missing for me. One, I wanted to use my science background and actually continue with some science, even though I didn't want to be a scientist. I still wanted to do something that was interesting and kind of leverage my qualifications. Secondly, I didn't really want to be in an office at the time. So I ended up kind of then falling into medical sales. So I joined a pharmaceutical company back in 1996, I think it was, as a medical sales rep. And it kind of ticked all the boxes. I was out on the road talking about science, learning about new products. And also it was fulfilling in the fact that the products, I was very lucky and blessed over my career. I've sold very good products that were effective and good for the patients, and many of the products I sold were for very, I guess you'd describe them as kind of last resort, revolving door patients. And I went through a number of different positions. I was at Pfizer for 15 years, which was a great training ground for me, and loved it. However, the big pharma corporate world didn't really fit my personality style. I think of myself as more entrepreneurial. So I went for a number of smaller companies until eventually had a conversation with someone about 3 years ago about medical cannabis, which I knew very little, but of course it was extremely interesting, and for a number of reasons. One, it was 3 years ago, as you will know, in the UK, there wasn't really a market. The law had only really just changed, and it was extremely difficult to get hold of products. It seemed like it was going to be an industry that if you joined it in the UK, it would be incredibly challenging. And I kind of thrive off that. So in a conversation back when Canopy Therapeutics was around, and Spectrum Biomedical, which was basically a joint venture between Canopy Growth and the Beckley Foundation in Oxford, I joined that business to help set up. I joined as Chief Operating Officer to help set that business up in the UK, build out a distribution centre, get the appropriate licenses to be able to start in essence, distributing medical cannabis in the UK to patients in need. That journey was unbelievably exciting. It was interesting. It was challenging, and I loved it. But interestingly, we thought it would be a long journey until we thought there would be an acquisition at some point, which happened actually 6 months later. So at the end of 2019, Canopy acquired that business outright. And as part of that acquisition, I became the European Managing Director for Canopy Growth. So I was off that position as part of the acquisition. And I joined Canopy to run the European business. And of course, when I was offered the role, I kind of bit their arm off, I bit their hand off. I was like, this is brilliant. Just a couple of things really. One, I got a taste for what the products can do. And that was in the UK, where there was as you all know, there was a very small population of patients. Back then, it was a tiny population of patients. There are more now, but still relatively small population of patients. I then had the opportunity to lead the German team, where, in Germany, we have a much bigger, more established market where, products are reimbursed. And so then, I grabbed the opportunity, and that's how I ended up at Canopy. And I guess the two things that stood out for me about Canopy and the industry in general, one, the industry is quite new. Then it's exciting, it's entrepreneurial. Everyone is kind of learning as they go along, which is great. So that's one of the reasons I joined. The second reason is patients who require medical cannabis. These patients have tried everything. They've tried all the traditional licensed medications, and they've moved towards medical cannabis because there really is no alternative. And so when this product works for patients, which it does, a lot, then it's a really fulfilling feeling knowing that they have been through so much, have had such dissatisfaction. And we're talking about, I mean, the large proportion of patients are chronic pain patients who, and I look at some of the patient stories where these are patients who have been unable to sleep for what could be years, really have a decent night's sleep. And then they try medical cannabis and it works for them. And then their lives are frankly transformed. And that's anyone in the pharmaceutical industry, that's what you're always aiming for. You're aiming to see that transformation in the patient's lives. And that's the bit that I've really enjoyed on this journey, is hearing all those patient stories, because sometimes you can be a bit removed from it, especially the more senior, the bigger the kind of more senior roles I've done. You're not as close to and we're never close to the patients, I'm metaphorically speaking, but you're not as close to those patient stories. And in this industry, they are so important that I hear them all the time. The team's always feeding back on what patients are using the product for, what conditions. And, the doctors give us the feedback of, these are patients who have been, really, really, really have tried everything and it's not worked. So that was another reason that this really interested me. I thought, this is brilliant. This is a new industry. It's different. It's still pharmaceuticals, but it's for patients who really require these products.
Yeah. Wow, it's fascinating. I like the way that you were drawn to the challenge, though, of it just being quite messy and no one knows what's going on. That's a great way to sort of get involved, I think, because you go in with your eyes wide open.
I did, yeah. And I'm not going to lie, it's been an incredible journey. It's been a frustrating journey as well. There's been the highs and lows, and in Canopy, there's a bit of a joke that when the Canopy years are like dog years. So when you say I've been in Canopy now, it's been 2.5 years. It is like 15 years. I've kind of, in terms of what I've learned, the things I've done, the people I've met, the challenges we faced, you could compare them to the 15 years I had at Pfizer. It's been that diverse and that different. So yeah, it's been unbelievably interesting. It has been unbelievably challenging, but I think the positive in all of that is that I've seen progress in 2.5 years, a lot of progress across the world, because now I'm leading the international market. So everything outside of North America, we're seeing progress across the world. It's steady steps forwards, and the positivity is there from governments, regulators, and physicians as well. So it's rewarding to know that we have, in just 2.5 years, made a lot of progress.
Absolutely. And I mean, there's a lot of kind of frontier mentality needed, I think, here, particularly in a role like yours. I would imagine, working for one of the bigger beasts in this space, but equally in territories where we're still very early, everyone's learning, regulators, businesses, etc. How are you kind of approaching that?
It's a really good question. We kind of say Spectrum Therapeutics is our kind of pharmaceutical brand at Canopy. So it's where all the medicinal products are sold under the Spectrum Therapeutics brand. And we have in essence 3 pillars that I like to always talk about externally. One is quality. So we manufacture high quality products across a broad product range. We manufacture to GMP standards. We manufacture to the gold standard of the regulations in whichever market we're operating in. And that's really, really important. So we know that quality, because the reality is, in traditional pharmaceuticals, I guess people don't feel a need to sort of talk about quality, but it's unbelievably important. As soon as there is either a fake product or, an issue with product recall because there's been an issue, it's a really big issue for patients. And so for us within the medical cannabis space, why should it be any different? Which is why quality should be at the forefront of everything we do. Second thing we talk about a lot is education. And it's an interesting one, because of course the cannabinoid system it's not discussed, or it's not presented at medical school. People aren't taught about the system. It's been around for 3,000 years, but it's not talked about. There are over 1,000 receptors in the human body. It's unbelievably complicated, but unbelievably interesting, but it's not taught at medical school. So when you come to talk to a doctor about medical cannabis, you are having to really start a really long educational program to make sure they understand how to use a product, or how to use a product appropriately for the different patient types, and how to use the different products that are available as well. So education is really, really important. We have an international education program through the Spectrum Therapeutics brand, which we're very proud of. It's a consistent program we can launch in any country across the world, which can take any doctor across the world through the journey of the cannabinoid system and all the products and how to use the products, etc. So education is unbelievably important. And actually honestly, that's no different to any pharmaceutical company, because whenever a new product is launched or a new therapy area is understood, education is important. And it can be education for governments, regulators, patients where appropriate, and doctors. And the third pillar we have is around relationships. So we work with many, 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 many stakeholders, from government officials to the regulators, but also we work with clinics. So in the UK, we work with clinics, and we work with doctors directly. and lots of different groups and stakeholders. So those relationships actually are really important to us because that's how we get the insights. And Canopy globally, one of the things we've moved towards in the last kind of 18 months is being an insights generated company. So it's making sure that whatever products we have across the world, whether you look at our consumer brands or whether you look at our medical brands, it's making sure we understand what is it that doctors, patients, what do they really, really want and need in our products? And because then we can develop and research the appropriate products to make sure they're fitting the needs of our patients and doctors. So that for us is we have a whole insights department now working on that. So that's incredibly important. Those relationships help us generate those insights.
Well, that's really fascinating, actually, that you're sort of reacting to insights. And I'm always curious about how much doctors know. Do they know what they don't know, if you like? Is it responding to patient feedback on particular things that are being prescribed, etc.? That kind of trial and error type approach.
Yeah, so we have going back to our education program, we talk to doctors about how to kind of in pharmaceutical terms titrate the product. So in a normal medicine, you would have a 5, 10, 15, 20 milligram dose, for example. I'm just using some random numbers, and doctors will tend to titrate. Say let's take paracetamol. You might start with the 500 milligrams. Your headache doesn't go, and some people then you might say actually, okay, you can double dose, so take 1,000 milligrams, etc. Now, cannabis is no different. So there's lots of different types of products from different THC levels to different CBD levels, and the idea is that doctors learn about how to take the patients through the different products till they reach the kind of happy medium of whether it be pain relief or whatever it is that's being treated with a lack of side effects. So that's kind of the journey. And the interesting thing is now the doctors, if we take some doctors in the UK that we're working with, the ones that now are generating, we're working with one partner on a real world evidence study of about 1,000 patients in the UK. And as that program has taken place over the last year and a half, the doctor involved, for example, is seeing so many more, they're seeing a lot of patients now and starting to learn around which product works for which conditions and how to use those products, which even combinations where there might be combinations of products. And that feedback that then comes back to us is incredibly useful to understand how our products are being used. And also it's helpful because that data eventually is extremely powerful we think it will be extremely powerful for regulators as well. Because we can actually say, here is like 1,000 patients who have, in the real world, not in a study situation where everything is managed very tightly. This is actually in the real world, patients taking products. We can give some real data to what we're actually doing, which I think will be really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, data is always welcomed, and we'll come on to that actually in a bit. I think you told us quite a lot about, some of the things that Canopy doing. Are there any other areas that you're kind of, that you'd like to highlight, the things that you guys are doing in Europe in particular?
So in Europe, gosh, yeah, we're doing a lot. I guess as we're in the UK, I'll start with the UK. So I think you'll know, Anish, the regulations in the UK, they changed a number of years ago, and we haven't seen the progress, I guess, that we would have liked to have seen in the UK. So the number of patients being prescribed medical cannabis in the UK isn't where it needs to be, really, and it's still extremely challenging. And there's a number of things that I think are very comparative to traditional pharmaceuticals in that you want a number of things you want in a product. You want a product that works. It needs to have efficacy. It has to work for the patient, but it needs to be affordable. And we're in a difficult situation at the moment because the regulations are so restrictive in the UK that really most patients are going through the private market. So are having to, pay for a consultation to see a doctor and then pay for the prescription of the products as well. So that's something we really want to see change. And of course, the other part of this as well, and we are talking to government about this, is there's two parts. One is that there are patients who really need these products. And if you look at the CMC, the Centre for Medical Cannabis numbers, and if you look at all the different numbers that are out in the public domain, it's around 1 to 1.4 million people today are buying cannabis from the illicit market for a medical use only. And clearly that's a challenge, which we're talking to government about. It's like that, it's going to be two reasons why. It's obviously one, you want patients to buy highly regulated quality product, which I referenced earlier. You want to know what they're actually getting and consuming, which of course on the illicit market is impossible to know what you're really getting. The second part, of course, is from an economy perspective. This is when you look across the world at, I guess, the revenue being generated by medical cannabis and cannabis in general, it's pretty significant. It's very significant. And in the UK, it could be, there could be a £2 billion market, which would encourage investment into the UK, would encourage an industry to be built. And if that industry gets built, of course, it means that more patients will get more products. So for us, that's really important. And so I think we're talking to government directly, we're talking to different government departments around how we work together to help address those challenges. And one of the things which, being really open, which has been the challenge for medical cannabis, is evidence. In the UK, really, products need to go through probably a NICE appraisal, so some form of health technology assessment. Now, in traditional synthetic pharmaceuticals, it's still a challenging process, and I've been through several NICE reviews in my career. None of them have been easy, even for a synthetic product that goes through the traditional route. But with a cannabis-based medicine, of course, it's even more complicated because there are so many different molecules within. It's not just CBD and THC, which I think many people simplify cannabis down to its core elements of CBD and THC. But there's way more than that in the cannabis plant. And, our vision has always been, and our mission as a business is to unleash the power of, we talk about unleashing the power of cannabis, because there's more to it than just THC and CBD. And we're doing lots of research into the different elements of the cannabis plant. But that, unfortunately, makes it extremely difficult to go through a NICE appraisal, for example. So one of the things we're trying to look at is a way that we can potentially partner with government to improve the evidence, but find a pragmatic solution to the challenge that we have today, which is we're not going to be able to do a NICE appraisal. We're not going to be able to do necessarily a randomized control, placebo-controlled trial as we would do in traditional pharmaceuticals. We need to do something else that's slightly different. And that's where we believe real-world evidence hopefully will fill that gap, which then gives regulators, authorities, the evidence they need to have comfort in broadening, in essence, opening up the regulations to allow more patients to get access to the products, which is what we're seeing in Germany. So in Germany, it's a blossoming market. It's growing very quickly. The fundamental difference in Germany is these products are reimbursed. So they're fully reimbursed, which completely removes this huge hurdle for patients whether they can afford the product or not. So that's a big change. And there's a lot more prescribers, a lot more doctors who are now educated on how to use cannabis medicines, which of course also helps because they're knowledgeable and patients can get comfort in going to a doctor to know what they need to get and get treatment. So we're seeing a lot of patients in the German market, and that market is growing very quickly since it opened up in 2017.
Yeah, and that's a really nice segue into the sort of main topic of the show around, your experiences in the pharmaceutical industry and just how difficult it is to get the two worlds to collide, if you like, of medical cannabis and pharma. What are some of the other challenges of trying to fit medical cannabis into the pharmaceutical model? The fact that it's a plant is one of them rather than synthetic, which is probably the predominant form of most pharmaceutical drugs. What are some of the other issues that make this very complicated?
Yeah, I think so. Well, one of the major ones is there is a stigma. And, since I've joined the industry 2.5 years ago, now, to all intents and purposes, I joined a pharmaceutical company. But then when people say, what do you do for a living? And you say, as I've always said, I work in pharmaceuticals. And I don't like boring people with my job because I'm not one of those people. So I don't not go into too much detail until I get asked more questions. But with this job, it's slightly different because actually it's really interesting. So it's quite nice to say, actually, I work in pharmaceuticals. We specialize in medical cannabis. Of course, you get a variety of reactions, obviously. So as soon as the word cannabis is mentioned, there are a variety of reactions.
Usually really bad jokes, I get.
And usually really the same bad joke, usually. And it's very hard to get past that stigma because that's the issue for me. That's one of the biggest issues we face as an industry. Because actually when you take, and we've done this, we did this in one of our educational programs. We took a group of doctors to Canada, actually, to one of our facilities. When you take someone to a facility, where you start with the flower, so where the plant is actually being grown, and you take them through the GMP process that we go through, so you end up with either the flower or an extract or whatever the product is at the end. It's a very different, those people come out of that tour and they come out with a much broader understanding of, wow, this is a serious business, and it's a serious pharmaceutical business. It's not just a cannabis company, so that's what we're trying to, I think that for me is a big part of our education, is we have to move people beyond the current stigma of cannabis is just recreational. Yes, there is a blossoming recreational market in North America, but in Europe and the markets I look after, it's purely medical. And it's trying to get people to understand that these are very significant, important products. And for the patients that take them, and these are not all 20-year-old young people taking cannabis, which is what I think people assume. These are some very elderly patients who have suffered for many years taking these products. And so for me, that's one of the biggest challenges we face, is just that stigma. And I think it's almost not, and maybe it's a frustration of mine personally, but everyone talks about the cannabis industry, which is an important new industry. It's an exciting, important new industry. But when we're talking about products, we are talking about pharmaceutical products. Now, they have a different status in different countries. So in the UK, it's an unlicensed medicine. And there are loads of unlicensed medicines on the market, have been for many, many years, that are used by pharmacies and doctors routinely. Specials, they're called specials in the UK. Cannabis is a special, and it's an unlicensed medicine, but it's a medicine. And I think that's the the point I always try and make whenever I'm discussing our products or our brands with anyone externally is they are medicines first and foremost, because actually then we can start treating them as they should be treated, which is as a medicine, because they are medicines. So that for me is a big educational piece. The second challenge, I think, really is around the different regulations around the world. So if you look at all the different European markets, Australia and markets in Latin America, the regulations are different in every single country, which of course, now this is very similar. I think you asked the question about what's the difference, between traditional pharmaceuticals. That actually is no different in some respects to traditional pharmaceuticals, because actually when you want to launch in Canada, for example, it's a different pricing process to get a price in Canada it would be in the US or some of the other markets. So there are big similarities in that we face very different regulations and we have to adapt to those different regulations. But that can make things quite difficult when you're trying to go for a consistent high quality product and launch in every single market. But some markets like to tweak their requirements for what they want. And that makes things a little bit harder as a global business to have that efficiency to launch products consistently across every market that you operate in. So that's a challenge for us. I think one of the things I've always been proud of is we've done a really good job with Canopy of navigating those processes, working very closely with the regulators. And it goes back to our relationships. We work very closely with the German regulators, the MHRA in the UK. We are making sure what products we bring fit every single regulation, kind of tick all the boxes so that we never have any issues, and we can shorten that timeline between kind of export of product from source to actually patients receiving product, which for the industry, when I joined 2.5 years ago, supply was the big topic. People couldn't get products, and many of the licensed producers in Canada struggled to get consistent supply. And Canopy were no different. 2.5 years ago, we struggled to get consistent supply because the regulations were quite stringent. Now, over time, we've managed to solve that, and supply is no longer, I don't need to talk about supply as an issue anymore, which is good. The industry has moved forwards in terms of adapting and making sure that supply is not a problem, because when you have patients with serious conditions, the last thing you ever want in medicine, the last thing you ever want is an out of stock. The last thing you need as a patient, then not to be able to get hold of product. So that's been quite a big shift in the industry in the last 2.5 years, which is good, which is positive, but that has been a challenge.
Yeah, lots of challenges. I think the lack of harmonization it's further complicated because it's plant material, so subject to lots more different influences than a white pill would be, whether it needs to be irradiated or that's not allowed, or, it's complex, right?
It's complex, yeah, and there's always going to be more challenges with, like you say, with basically a biological material, because there's always going to be some form of microbiology, for example. So that can just happen. Suddenly there might be some traces of microbiome. We do microbiological assessment, or we'll have to on all our products, obviously. And of course, there's always going to be that higher risk with the biological products, that having that consistency is so much harder than a synthetic producing a tablet, in essence, where you're adding ingredients. In simple terms, you're adding ingredients together, chemicals, putting them into a pill, and then off the product goes. And it's relatively straightforward. And I'm sure there'll be many people in the pharmaceutical industry will be horrified that I've just said it's relatively straightforward, because I know it's not completely relatively straightforward, but it's a lot more straightforward.
Yeah, and more established, right? You know the rules that you're playing within, to a greater extent. I mean, look, obviously we've covered some of this stuff before on the show, and when it comes up around pharmaceuticals, the single molecule versus the multi-compound kind of aspect, how do you see that inherent difficulty?
So I guess we touched on when I mentioned the kind of NICE review and kind of placebo-controlled, randomized controlled trials, in that it's extremely difficult when you have a product that is made up of 200 or 300 potentially molecules, and trying to pin down which of those are actually having the effect is quite difficult. One of the things which I think is really exciting, one of the things we're doing in North America actually, is we're working on kind of movement. And this is more in the consumer space, so it's not necessarily for Europe, but however, it's interesting because what we're doing is mood modulation. So we're doing a lot of research into what effect does our products have on consumers' moods. So in fact, we conducted quite a large trial on one of our vapes. So we've got a vape called Whistle, which we sell in North America. And in essence, there are three different states. In simple terms, one which is you're tuned up, ready to go and focused, one which is helping you relax, and one which helps you get to sleep. And we took those three states and we basically gave product to consumers, didn't tell them what products they were getting, and then got them to report back on what the effect was. And of course, the results were unbelievably positive in terms of actually the effect was what we hoped it would be. So
they correlated well to what you thought they would do.
Exactly. So this is the reason this is important for us in Europe, is because actually that mood modulation research and understanding the science behind how the product is working is then helpful in thinking about the therapeutic effect that the products can have in different conditions. I mean, it's unbelievably exciting. This is in CBD, by the way, so it's not a THC product, so in the CBD. So it's unbelievably exciting for CBD because there's a lot of, let's be honest, there's a lot of rhetoric around CBD, and I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about CBD, and there's a lot of products with CBD that I think a lot of people don't really understand. And I think what is different about Canopy is we're conducting lots of research to understand, so that when we sell and promote those products, we kind of know what the consumer's getting and what the effect might be. I think that's unbelievably exciting. And there's a really good link to the science of, right, okay, what does that mean for therapeutics? What does that mean for medical cannabis as well? So we're doing lots of research. I think as a company, we're doing a ton of research into all of our products to really understand what they do. So, and then to get to the bottom of, okay, which cannabinoids are having the effect, and how do we work with that? So it's really interesting. For me, that's really interesting.
Just to probe a bit on that, to borrow a phrase from our psychedelic cousins, did you record the setting side of things in terms of the mood?
We just recorded. I'm not sure we did actually. I'd honestly have to go back and check. I'm just giving you the highlights.
No, don't worry. It's just fascinating, isn't it? Like, there are a huge amount of factors that affect, the very idea of placebo in itself is quite amazing when you start to read up on that. So, yeah, fascinating. And, do you think there are parts of the pharma industry or the way this system operates that need adapting and modernizing as well because of this difficulty of dealing with multi-compound medicines? Real world evidence you mentioned earlier, it's very popular in cannabis circles because it addresses certain issues that you can't get in an RCT. How do you see those two things kind of working together?
So it's a really good question. I think for me, there's the thing that is at the front of mind for everyone is patient safety. So the reason the evidence is needed is not just because people are being difficult. It's not because the regulators and the government say, well, we just want evidence because we always have asked for evidence. It's because there's two things. One is patient safety, which is really important. And the second one is that product that is being commissioned and paid for by the government. So if you look at the German government, who are spending many millions of euros on product because it's reimbursed, they need comfort to know that actually the product is doing something. And, we've all seen horror stories around COVID of companies trying to sell products that frankly had no evidence at all and try and purport that they're going to solve COVID. And, so that's the worst end of the spectrum. And I guess for us, the real world evidence is a good way of demonstrating both patient safety and efficacy as well. So for me, I think we can, done in the right way with the right intentions, I think that's a good path forward for medical cannabis for a product that has so many different facets.
Yeah, definitely. Do you hear that, doctors tend to be a little bit skeptical about that data? I don't know what your impressions are, versus the gold standard stuff that they're used to.
I think you get different views. I mean, real world evidence is very popular in traditional pharmaceuticals, and the reason it is because you can conduct a randomized controlled trial where patients are monitored pretty closely, kind of not made to take product, but they are kind of have to take the product under certain scenarios. And it's kind of not what happens in the real world. We all know that patients forget to take their meds, don't want to take their meds. They believe that it's worked or not worked, whatever. So that's why real world evidence becomes so important, because you can say, actually, what actually happens, does the product still work in the real world when patients do forget to take their meds or whatever. So that's why, and I think that translates well into medical cannabis, actually, because then you can see, are patients taking the product as they're supposed to take the product? Are they having an effect? Is it really changing their condition that you're trying to treat? Does it actually work? And also the other side of real world evidence is the cost efficacy side, of course, which is, for example, if you're removing an opioid, because we know opioids have had a bit of a bad press for obvious reasons, but if you're going to remove from high opioid usage to medical cannabis, clearly there's probably going to be a cost efficacy argument as well as a side effect argument and all the other, and addictive and all the other stuff that goes with it. So that's interesting as well, because that gives us the ability to not only talk to the regulators about patient safety and talk about efficacy, it also gives us the ability to then talk to the payers about actually, because there is this concern, of course, as there always is with every new medicine, that you're going to break the bank. This becomes kind of a free-for-all. This is a great product, it works for everything. And then suddenly everyone wants a product, they want the government to pay for it, and they can't afford it. So that's why you need that data also to reassure the payers that actually there are distinct patient groups and there is cost benefit to using these products. So for us, that's another important long-term goal that we can start to look at that as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge topic, isn't it? Yeah, as we get towards the end, there were loads of questions I would like to ask, but I'm conscious of time. Maybe we can touch on the kind of regulatory side of things and the challenges that exist in the UK. And maybe if I can just add a nuance. Firstly, what do you think what's happening in the UK? You've touched upon some of it. Do you think there are other jurisdictions that we can look to that are maybe doing it better? Germany would be the obvious one, I suppose.
Yeah, I think the challenge in the UK is the challenges are quite significant. I think there's two big challenges in the UK. Kind of the import-export of products. So we currently can't export product from the UK to other markets. So if you want to build an industry in the UK, it's quite difficult when it's a very small market in the UK and you can't actually export to the bigger market. So that's one restriction which makes things difficult from a business perspective. The second one is around, I guess, it's around the education and the liability around the product. So currently, as an unlicensed medicine, the liability of what happens with that product sits squarely on the doctor's shoulders, which of course is some doctors, that's quite a difficult position. They feel like it could be quite a difficult position to be in, which is why the evidence then is so important to help to educate those doctors and reassure them of how to use the products and why the products are good and should be used appropriately. The other part around the regulations really is reimbursement is the big one, because in the 25 years I've worked in pharmaceuticals, if your product is not reimbursed for any reason, because it's either not got through a NICE approval, not got through the equivalent an AMNOG process in Germany, whatever it is, whichever HTA you're looking at, if you don't get the price that you want and it's not agreed and then it's therefore not reimbursed, it is always extremely difficult for that product ever really to take off, because patients don't want to pay for their own products privately, and those that do are a very small proportion. So you find some products end up being always very, very niche products, and that's kind of where cannabis sits today, because there is no reimbursement in the UK, and that's one of the big challenges. So we kind of need to address so that patients can get access appropriately, because the whole goal for us is to improve access for patients to the medicines. And you're right, the market to look at would be Germany. So Germany have a really good system, quite a very robust system, a very highly regulated system. The German system is highly regulated, and appropriate patients get reimbursed. So not everyone gets reimbursed in Germany. The reimbursement.
Do you know what the criteria is?
Yeah, so there's a long list, but I mean, the reimbursement rate at the moment, and there's kind of paperwork for doctors to complete to go to their insurance companies, to the sick funds in Germany, to get that reimbursed. Roughly speaking, the reimbursement rate is around anywhere between 60 to 80%. So not everyone is getting their product reimbursed, but a large proportion are. And so Germany would be a very good model to look at. There is a medical trial. There's a cannabis trial in Denmark, which has been taking place for the last, I think it's the 4-year mark now.
It's got extended, didn't it?
And it's been extended. So that's another one that could be looked at as well. So there are different models, and I think a combination of the two would be good. In the UK, to move very quickly to the German model might be one step too far, but to move stepwise to a trial program like we have in Denmark, I think would be a good step forward. And I think the government honestly, are open to ideas to make sure to find a solution to the problem that we have, because we do have a problem. There are many patients who can't get access to the products that they need. It's particularly, from a media perspective, of course, it's the children that are in the media, epilepsy, and that's always been a challenge. So, but there are lots of patients out there, and we talk about this 1.4 million patients who are, I don't like to describe it this way, but they're kind of almost buying products on the street corner, which in any pharmaceutical, that would be unacceptable. That you would have to go and source your product from an illegal source. It's just it would be completely unacceptable. And I think that's a major issue. How we move those patients to a regulated product is the piece that we need to work on. That's for us is a medium to long-term goal that we need to address.
Yeah, and I mean, allied to that is you're getting no guidance whatsoever on, and you might be getting guidance, but it's not from a medical professional on how much to take and how to take it and all these things.
Exactly. I mean, the other market, so France, they're doing a trial program as well with several companies that are supplying product. We've been very lucky to be able to, we're supplying our Storz & Bickel. So, I have a medical device brand, Storz & Bickel. We've been very fortunate. We are the sole supplier of devices for that trial, because Storz & Bickel is the only certified medical device, basically. So it's the gold standard, particularly for using flower products. So we've agreed with the French authorities that will be sole supplier of the devices for that trial. And so it's a combination of all those different elements of taking, for us in the UK, we have a device which is certified as a medical device. We should be using that medical device appropriately. So the patients, if they're not using an extract, an oil or an extracted product, if they're using flower, they're using the appropriate technology to use the product, which would be a Storz & Bickel device.
Yeah, wow, there's loads there, isn't there? Huge amounts to come. We could talk for a lot longer, Paul, but I'm going to draw a line under it there. Thank you so much for joining me. It's great to hear about all the initiatives, particularly like the stuff that you're talking about around working with government. I think they probably need a lot of hand-holding. I mean, most people do. It's also new, and having to unlearn all the stuff that we've had for decades of stigma. It's no small undertaking, so thank you for doing that.
No, it's good. We're enjoying it. Thank you. Listen, thank you for the time. I've enjoyed the chat.
I appreciate it. It'd be great to have you back on at some point as well.
I'd love to.
Brilliant. Cheers, Paul.
Thanks, Anish.
Thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed the show. If you did, please subscribe, rate, review and share the podcast. It will help me spread the good word on how this amazing industry is developing. I work with various cannabis startups to help them get funded and grow. I also work with corporates and international cannabis companies to help them understand and navigate the European cannabis sector. We're working with some great clients across the cannabis value chain and we'd love to help you too. Please visit www.canverse.global to get in touch.